No one came, not when you cried, not when you broke, and that absence built the person you are today. When no one comes for a child, the body learns a lesson the mind cannot forget. It learns that danger is unpredictable, that safety is temporary, and that rest is risky. Long before language develops, the nervous system adapts. Muscles stay slightly tense. Breathing becomes shallow. Attention sharpens, not toward curiosity, but toward threat. This is not anxiety yet. This is survival being installed as a default setting. That child doesn't become alert because they want to. They become alert because no one else was. There was no external regulator, no calm voice saying, "You're safe now." So the body took over that role. It learned to scan faces, tones, footsteps, silences. It learned to read the room faster than other children read books. Hypervigilance isn't a personality trait, it's a nervous system that never received the signal to stand down. As the years pass, the world may become quieter, but the body doesn't update automatically. The danger may be gone, but the wiring remains. In adulthood, this shows up subtly. You struggle to relax even when nothing is wrong. Silence feels loud. Calm feels suspicious. When things are going well, a part of you waits for the collapse. Not because you're pessimistic, but because historically calm was always followed by impact. You might call it overthinking, but it's deeper than thoughts. It's a body that learned thinking was the only protection it had. So it plans, anticipates, replays conversations, imagines outcomes. Control becomes a substitute for safety. If you can predict everything, maybe nothing will hurt you. But the cost is constant mental exhaustion. You are never fully here because part of you is always ahead, guarding against a future that already feels hostile. This hypervigilance also shapes relationships. You notice shifts others miss. A delayed reply, a change in tone, a slight withdrawal. Your system flags it immediately. Sometimes you're right, often you're not. But the reaction happens before logic can intervene. Your body learned that subtle changes mattered. Because once, they did. Once, they were the only warning before something went wrong. What's most painful is that this vigilance often gets praised. You're called responsible, mature, strong. No one sees that this strength was forged in the absence of protection. No one sees the toll of always being on. You don't know how to rest deeply, because rest was never modeled as safe. Even sleep can feel shallow, interrupted, as if your body refuses to fully let go. Healing doesn't begin by forcing relaxation. That only makes the system more suspicious. Healing begins by understanding that this vigilance once saved you. It was intelligent, necessary, but it's outdated. The work is not to erase it, but to slowly teach the body what it never learned, that safety can exist without constant monitoring, that stillness doesn't always precede harm, that you no longer have to be the one who stays awake so nothing bad happens. This takes time, patience, repetition, and often grief. Because when the vigilance softens, something else surfaces, the realization that you should never have had to be this alert in the first place, that a child was left to guard themselves, that no one came, and the body never forgot. When protection is absent, the child doesn't just adapt to the outside world. They turn inward and begin a quieter, more devastating process. They abandon themselves, not all at once, but in small, strategic ways that make survival possible. They learn quickly which parts of them create trouble, needs that are ignored, emotions that overwhelm others, questions that go unanswered. So they start editing themselves. They become smaller where it's safer to be small, quieter where silence avoids punishment, less needy because needing never brought relief. This isn't weakness, it's intelligence under pressure. The child learns that expressing pain doesn't lead to comfort, only to more exposure. So pain gets pushed down, hunger becomes negotiable, exhaustion becomes normal, sadness becomes private. Over time, the child stops asking not because they don't need, but because needing feels dangerous. The message sinks deep. Relying on others is a risk you can't afford. As this child grows, self-abandonment stops looking like deprivation and starts looking like character. You're easygoing, independent, low maintenance. You don't complain, you don't demand, you pride yourself on not needing much. But underneath that identity is a long history of learning that your needs were inconvenient, or worse, invisible. So you learned to meet everyone else first, hoping proximity would earn safety. This pattern follows you into adulthood quietly. You stay in situations that drain you. You tolerate emotional distance, disrespect, even neglect, because leaving feels more threatening than staying. At least here, the rules are familiar. You overfunction in relationships. You anticipate others' moods. You adjust yourself constantly. And when you're exhausted, you don't rest. You push harder. Because rest was never something you were allowed to need. What makes self-abandonment so hard to see is that it often feels like love. You give, you endure, you sacrifice. But real love doesn't require you to disappear. This pattern isn't generosity. It's an old survival strategy, replaying itself. Somewhere deep inside, the child is still trying to secure safety by being easier to keep. Even your inner dialogue reflects this abandonment. You minimize your pain. You talk yourself out of feelings. You tell yourself others have it worse. You shame yourself for wanting more. This internal voice isn't yours originally. It's the echo of an environment where your inner world didn't matter. Over time, you internalized the neglect and became its enforcer. And yet, there's a quiet grief beneath it all. A grief not just for what was done, but for who you had to stop being. The spontaneous child, the needy child, the one who could reach out without fear. Self-abandonment costs you intimacy with yourself first. And without that, intimacy with others becomes distorted, conditional, exhausting. Healing begins when you recognize this pattern without judgment. The goal isn't to shame yourself for self-neglect, but to understand why it formed. You didn't abandon yourself because you were broken. You did it because no one else was reliably there. Reclaiming yourself now means slowly allowing needs to exist without punishment. Letting emotions rise without immediately managing them away. Learning that taking up space doesn't automatically lead to loss. This work feels terrifying at first, because choosing yourself once meant danger. But over time, each small act of self-loyalty rewires the message. You teach the nervous system a new truth. Survival no longer depends on disappearing. You were never too much. You were left alone. When a child grows up without protection, love doesn't register as comfort. It registers as risk. Care arrives inconsistently, if at all, so the nervous system learns to associate closeness with exposure. Attention doesn't feel warm, it feels dangerous. Being seen once meant being hurt, ignored, or left. So the child adapts by keeping a careful distance from attachment while still longing for it. This contradiction becomes the emotional blueprint carried into adulthood. As an adult, you may say you want connection, and you do. But when it appears, something in you tightens. Your body braces, you analyze, you pull back just as things deepen. It's not that you don't want intimacy, it's that intimacy feels unfamiliar. Absence, on the other hand, feels known. Emotional distance feels predictable. It mirrors the early environment where you learned how to survive. This is why emotionally unavailable people can feel strangely magnetic. They don't overwhelm your system. Their inconsistency feels familiar, almost comforting. You don't have to relax around them, because relaxation was never part of love anyway. You work for their attention. You wait. You hope. The pattern repeats not because you enjoy pain, but because your nervous system recognizes the terrain. Where someone shows up consistently, it can feel unsettling. Their care doesn't come with conditions you understand. There's no tension to read, no mood to manage, no silence to decode. And without that vigilance, you feel exposed. You don't know where you stand because you were never taught that steadiness could exist. So you may test them, doubt them, or emotionally withdraw to regain a sense of control. Often, this gets mislabeled as fear of commitment or emotional unavailability. But it's deeper than choice. It's memory stored in the body. Your system learned that attachment didn't equal safety, it equaled vulnerability without backup. So now, closeness triggers the same alert response, once reserved for danger. This pattern can make you feel broken. You wonder why you can tolerate neglect but struggle with genuine care. Why you feel more alive in chaos than in calm. Why you confuse intensity with intimacy. The truth is, your system was trained in a world where love didn't protect you. It learned to bond through endurance, not ease. There's also grief here, a quiet one. The grief of realizing that what you called love was often just familiarity with absence. That what you chased wasn't connection, but resolution. You weren't trying to repeat the past, you were trying to finally change the ending, to be chosen this time, to be protected this time. But the psyche can't heal a wound by re-entering the same environment that created it. Healing begins when you stop judging your attachment patterns and start understanding them. When you realize that your pull toward distance isn't a flaw, it's a nervous system trying to stay safe. The work is slow and uncomfortable. It means allowing closeness without performing, letting consistency exist without sabotaging it, learning to sit in the unfamiliar quiet of being cared for. This kind of love feels boring at first, flat, almost empty. That's because your system isn't used to peace. It was wired for alertness, not safety. Over time, though, something shifts. The absence of chaos stops feeling like absence. It starts to feel like space, like room to breathe, like something you were always meant to have. And that's when the truth becomes unavoidable. Distance felt like home. There is a grief that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with tears or collapse. It lives quietly beneath the surface, often mistaken for emptiness, numbness, or a vague sense that something is missing. This grief comes from not being protected, not being rescued, not being held when holding was necessary. It isn't about what happened, it's about what never did. As a child, you didn't have the language to name that absence. You only felt it. You learned early that no one was coming, so there was no point in waiting. You learned to endure instead of cry, to adapt instead of ask, to stay functional instead of falling apart. The grief had nowhere to go, so it went underground. It became part of your baseline. In adulthood, this grief often shows up sideways. You feel detached in moments that should move you. You struggle to feel joy fully, or when you do, it feels temporary, fragile, like it might be taken away. Sometimes you feel an ache with no clear cause. Other times you feel nothing at all. Numbness becomes a refuge because feeling too much once led nowhere. What makes this grief so complex is that there is no clear memory attached to it. You're not mourning a single event. You're mourning a childhood that never had a witness, a version of you that never got to rest, a safety that was never established. It's grief without a funeral, without validation, without permission. Many people carry this grief while appearing high-functioning. You work, you succeed, you keep going. On the outside, you look fine. On T. Inside, there's a quiet loneliness that never fully leaves. Not because you lack people, but because no one ever truly saw the depth of what you carried, and eventually you stopped showing it. This grief can make you feel fundamentally different from others, like there's an invisible wall between you and the world. Others seem to move through life assuming support exists. You move through life assuming it doesn't. That difference shapes everything: how you trust, how you hope, how you prepare for loss before it arrives. Sometimes this grief turns inward. You blame yourself for feeling empty. You tell yourself you should be over it, that it wasn't that bad, that others had it worse. This self-invalidation is just another echo of the original wound. Once again, your pain goes unseen. Once again, it's minimized. Healing doesn't begin by forcing positivity or chasing happiness. It begins by allowing this grief to exist without explanation, by acknowledging that something essential was missing, and that missing something essential leaves a mark. You don't have to dramatize it. You don't have to justify it. You only have to tell the truth. When this grief is finally recognized, it often hurts more at first. The numbness fades and the sadness surfaces. This can feel like regression, but it isn't. It's delayed mourning. It's the body finally feeling safe enough to feel what it couldn't before. This is not weakness. This is the beginning of integration. Over time, something shifts. The grief doesn't disappear, but it softens. It becomes less isolating. You stop fighting it and start listening to it. And what it asks for is simple but profound acknowledgement. Witness, care that arrives now, even if it didn't then. Because the deepest wound was never the pain. It was the silence. No one came, so you became everything, and it cost you.